36 years old, Calvin Hayes made $51,000 a year as an HVAC technician. It was an honest living, built on calloused hands and the satisfaction of bringing warmth to a cold house or cool air to a sweltering one. He drove a 10-year-old Ford Transit van with 147,000 miles on it. Its sides scuffed, but its engine meticulously maintained. He believed in taking care of things. His tools, his van, his family. He thought he had been doing a good job. He was wrong. The day after he buried his father, Calvin stood in the living room of the cramped two-bedroom apartment he shared with his wife, Charisse. The air was thick with the scent of wilting funeral lilies and the unspoken things that had been festering for years. Rain tapped against the window pane, a soft, mournful rhythm that matched the ache in his chest. His father, James, was gone. The man who had taught him how to hold a wrench, how to read a wiring diagram, and how to be a decent human being was now just a memory and a plot of earth in a North Philadelphia cemetery. Charisse stood by the door, her arms crossed. She was wearing a pair of $250 Lululemon leggings and a crisp white blouse, already shed of her black mourning dress from the day before. Her long, elegant braids were pulled back into a severe ponytail. She wasn't looking at him, but at a point just over his shoulder. "You need to leave, Calvin," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the sympathy he had clung to like a life raft for the past week. Calvin blinked. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. "Leave? What are you talking about? Where would I go?" "I don't know. Your father's house, I guess," she said with a shrug. "It's empty now. You need to pack your things. I want you out by the end of the weekend." From the small kitchen, her mother, Odette, emerged. She held a steaming mug in her hands, a smug, satisfied look on her face. Odette had been a constant, oppressive presence for the past 5 years, ever since she'd moved into their spare room after her own husband passed. She never paid rent, but she offered a steady stream of criticism that she passed off as maternal advice. "Finally," Odette said, her voice a low, triumphant hum. She took a delicate sip from her $45 Ember mug, a gift from Charisse. "Finally, my daughter can live right." The word "finally" struck Calvin with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a spontaneous comment. It was the uncorking of a long-held desire. He looked from his mother-in-law's gloating face to his wife's cold, impassive one. The devastating truth of his situation began to settle over him, heavy and suffocating. His father was gone. His wife was kicking him out. His home was no longer his. He was a man adrift, and they were the ones who had cut the rope. He had no idea this was only the beginning. He couldn't possibly imagine how deep their betrayal truly ran, or the cold, precise storm that was about to gather within him. What had he done to deserve this? He was about to find out it had nothing to do with what he'd done, and everything to do with what he now had. Before you hear about the cold fury that replaced Calvin's grief, let us know if you've ever witnessed a betrayal that left you speechless. Share your story in the comments, because sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward finding your strength. Their life before his father's illness took its final turn had been a tapestry of domestic normalcy, woven with threads of financial tension. Calvin saw it as a life they were building. Charisse, he was beginning to understand, saw it as a prison she was waiting to escape. They lived in a third-floor walk-up in Olney, paying $1,350 a month for 85 square yards of space that felt smaller every day, especially with Odette occupying the second bedroom. Calvin's days started at 5:30 a.m. He'd quietly make coffee in their small galley kitchen, the $80 Mr. Coffee machine gurgling softly. He would pack a lunch for himself, usually leftovers, and one for their 7-year-old son, Micah. Micah's lunchbox was a bright blue Spider-Man one that cost $15 at Target, and Calvin always included a note drawn on a napkin. a smiley face, a little truck, a heart. He'd kiss Micah's sleeping head, the boy's twist soft against his lips, and then head out to his van. His work was demanding, especially during the brutal Philadelphia summers and freezing winters, but his paycheck, which came to about $3,200 a month after taxes, always cleared. It paid the rent, the utilities, the $450 monthly payment on Cheris's 2018 Honda Civic, and kept food on the table. It just never seemed to be enough. Cherise worked as a paralegal for a downtown law firm, earning a respectable $62,000 a year. Yet her salary seemed to vanish into a mist of small luxuries and unspoken wants. There was always a new serum from Sephora for $90, a subscription box for $60 a month, or takeout from expensive restaurants that cost $100 a meal because she was too tired to cook. "Did you see the new construction in Chestnut Hill?" she asked one evening, scrolling through Zillow on her $1,200 iPhone. Calvin was on the floor, tightening a loose leg on their second-hand IKEA coffee table, a piece they had bought for $50 on Facebook Marketplace. "Can't say I have," Calvin said, focused on the task. "This one is gorgeous," she said, turning the phone toward him. The screen showed a sprawling, modern Tudor-style house. 6 bedrooms, gourmet kitchen. They're asking $590,000. Calvin glanced at the picture. The house was beautiful, a world away from their cramped apartment with its peeling paint and view of a brick wall. "It's nice, Cherise. It's also $500,000. My point," she said, turning the phone back, "is that people are living like that. People we went to high school with. Tiffany just posted pictures from their trip to Italy. Her husband's in finance." "I'm in HVAC," Calvin said quietly. "It's a good trade." "It's a trade, Calvin. It's not a career," Odette chimed in from her armchair, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "My Cherise has a career. She has potential. She shouldn't be held back by a man who's content to play with furnaces." Calvin felt the familiar sting of her words. He finished tightening the screw and stood up, wiping his hands on his $30 work pants. "The furnace paid for that phone in your hand, Cherise, and it keeps this apartment warm, Odette." Cherise sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. "Don't be so defensive. All I'm saying is, I want more for us. For Micah. Don't you?" "Of course I do," he said, but his more and her more were different things. His more was a small house with a yard for Micah to play in, maybe in a neighborhood like Mount Airy. A house he could afford, one he could fix up himself. Her more was a gleaming status symbol in Chestnut Hill, a life funded by a level of wealth he couldn't provide. The disparity showed up in small, constant ways. For their anniversary, he had saved up for months to buy her a $400 gold necklace with Micah's initial on it. She wore it for a day. Then it disappeared into her jewelry box. A week later, she came home with a $900 Tory Burch bag she'd bought herself. "It was on sale," she'd said, avoiding his eyes. "I deserved a little treat." His father, James, saw it all. During his Sunday visits, he would sit at their small dining table, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in the turbulent household. He'd watch Odette's thinly veiled insults and Cherise's discontented sighs. James lived in the same Germantown row home he'd bought for $20,000 in 1985. The house was modest, but it was paid for. On the ground floor was the 2-chair barber shop he had run for 40 years. A neighborhood institution. "She's got expensive taste, son," James had said to him once, out on the sidewalk after a tense Sunday dinner. "She works hard," Calvin had defended, a reflex. James had just nodded, his gaze knowing. "There's working hard, and there's wanting what you haven't earned. Don't you ever forget the difference." Calvin didn't know then that his father was giving him more than just advice. He was giving him a warning. a warning that would soon become the cornerstone of his survival. The cruelty began the moment his father's doctor delivered the final, grim prognosis. James had 2 months, maybe 3. The lung cancer, a ghost from his youth, had returned with a vengeance. That very night, as Calvin sat stunned and hollowed out by grief, Cheris's focus was sharp and practical. "We need to talk about the house," she said. They were in their bedroom. Calvin was staring at the wall, the doctor's words echoing in his head. "What house?" he asked, his voice thick. "Your father's house, Calvin," she said, her tone edged with impatience. "He doesn't have a will, does he? You're his only child. That house will pass to you. And since we're married, it passes to me, too." He was disgusted by her timing, by the predatory gleam in her eye. "Can we not do this right now? My father is dying." "This is exactly when we need to do this," she insisted. "We have to be smart. That property in Germantown is probably worth $180,000, maybe more. It's our ticket out of this apartment. It's Micah's future." In the weeks that followed, as Calvin spent every spare moment at his father's bedside, Cheris's and Odette's conversations became a low, conspiratorial murmur in the background of his life. He'd come home late, exhausted from watching his father fade, and find them at the kitchen table, poring over papers. "The probate process can take forever," he overheard Odette saying one night. "And the taxes, they'll eat you alive if you're not careful." "I'm looking into it, Mama," Cherise had whispered back, quickly shuffling the documents into a folder as he entered the room. "Don't worry, I've got it handled." Calvin was too consumed by his impending loss to question her. He assumed she was trying to be helpful in her own pragmatic, unsentimental way. He had no idea he was witnessing the blueprint of his own betrayal. The day his father passed away, Calvin held his hand until it grew cold. He called Cherise, his voice breaking. "He's gone." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she said, but her voice was distant, distracted. I'll start making some calls for the arrangements." For the next 4 days, Calvin moved through a fog. He met with the funeral director at the $15,000 service he was paying for with his father's small life insurance policy. He wrote the obituary. He picked out a simple pine casket that cost $2,000. He called relatives and his father's old friends. Through it all, Cherise was a blur of efficiency. She handled paperwork, fielded phone calls, and coordinated with the church. He was grateful, thinking she was shouldering the logistical burden so he could grieve. The day he was at the funeral home finalizing the details of the burial, a task that took 3 agonizing hours, Cherise was not with him. She had said she had a critical deadline at work. He later found out from a time-stamped receipt in her car that she had met her mother for lunch at a $150 a plate restaurant downtown. What he wouldn't know until later was what she did after lunch. At the funeral, Cherise stood beside him, a perfect picture of a grieving daughter-in-law. She held his arm, her head resting on his shoulder. Odette was on his other side, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. But Calvin felt a profound sense of isolation. Their comfort felt like a performance. His son, Micah, was the only source of genuine warmth. Kept safely with a cousin during the funeral itself, Micah had given him a drawing before he left. It was a picture of a little row house with a red and white striped barber pole out front. 2 figures stood in the doorway. One was small, with twists sticking up, and the other was taller. "That's Grandpa's house," Micah had explained, his small finger pointing. "And that's you, Daddy, your home." Calvin had folded the drawing carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, his heart aching. Micah saw the house as a home, a place of belonging for his father. Cherise and Odette saw it as an asset to be liquidated. The day after the burial, the performance ended. That was when Cherise stood in their living room and told him to leave. This is my home, he stammered, the shock of it making him feel stupid. Micah will be fine, she said coolly. He'll stay here with me. We can work out visitation later. For now, I just need you to go. I need space. Space? He repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. You're kicking me out of my home the day after I buried my father, and you're calling it needing space? Odette stepped forward, her face a mask of contempt. She's been patient with you for years, Calvin, living in this shoebox, waiting for you to get your act together. Your father's passing is a tragedy, yes, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity for my daughter to finally have the life she deserves, without you holding her down. The words "holding her down" echoed in the silent room. He looked at Charisse, searching for any flicker of the woman he had married, the woman who had once laughed at his jokes and held his hand in the movies. He found nothing. Her face was a stranger's, her eyes hard and empty. Get your things, she repeated, her voice like ice. I'll have Micah stay with a friend this weekend so we don't have to do this in front of him. The mention of his son, used as a tool to manage her own convenience, was the final, devastating blow. He felt the grief for his father curdle into something else. A cold, hard knot of rage began to form in the pit of his stomach. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He simply turned, walked to the bedroom, and pulled a duffel bag from the top of the closet. He packed a few changes of clothes, his work uniforms, and his toiletries. As he zipped the bag, his hand brushed against the pocket of the suit jacket he'd worn to the funeral. He pulled out Micah's drawing, the little stick figure of him standing in the doorway of his father's house. You're home, Daddy. He looked at the drawing, then at the life he was being ejected from. A quiet, terrifying calm settled over him. He walked out of the bedroom, past Charisse and Odette, and didn't say a word. He closed the apartment door softly behind him, the click of the latch sounding like the final closing of a chapter. He had no idea that the next chapter was a war he was about to unknowingly win. The first few days at his father's house in Germantown were a blur of dust and sorrow. The air inside was stale, holding the faint, lingering scent of his father's Old Spice aftershave and the pipe tobacco he'd given up years ago. It was a house frozen in time. A stack of National Geographic magazines from the 1990s sat on a side table. His father's reading glasses rested on an open Bible. For Calvin, it was a sanctuary of memory, each object a connection to the man he'd lost. He spent his time moving from room to room, touching things, trying to feel his father's presence. He ran his hand over the worn velvet of his father's favorite armchair. He stood in the small, tidy kitchen, remembering the Sunday breakfasts of scrambled eggs and sausage his dad would make for him as a boy. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He called Micah every night, his voice bright and steady, promising to see him soon. He told Charisse he was sorting things out and needed a little time, playing along with her narrative of him needing space. The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning at 11:14 a.m. Calvin was sitting on the floor of his father's small bedroom, a cardboard box of old photographs open in his lap. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dancing dust motes. He was looking at a faded picture of his parents on their wedding day, his mother beautiful in her simple white dress, his father beaming with pride. His phone buzzed on the floor beside him. It was an unknown number with a 215 area code. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Is this Calvin Hayes?" a woman's voice asked, crisp and professional. "Yes, this is he." "Mr. Hayes, my name is Darlene Fincher. I'm a clerk with the Philadelphia Department of Records. I'm calling about a property at 5617 West Coulter Street." Calvin's heart gave a little jolt. It was the address of the house he was sitting in. "Yes? I'm here now. It was my father's house. He just passed away." "Yes, "Our condolences for your loss," she said, a rote but not unkind sentiment. That's actually related to why I'm calling. We have a bit of a procedural